Freelance Editing Part 1. I've titled this Freelance Editing, but I'm going to be talking a little bit about the differences between in-house and freelance editing first. You could find yourself in either one of these situations, or you might find yourself in some sort of a hybrid situation. Oftentimes, for example, editing can end up becoming part of a communications job. If it's a smaller staff, you might end up doing some in-house editing and then decide to take on some freelance clients as well. It's quite a changeable situation with taking on editing jobs, depending upon the situation, of course. So if you are working as an in-house editor, so in other words, your primary task at your 9-to-5 job is editing, then what you're looking at is quite probably predictable employment, which would include likely predictable hours, perhaps predictable tasks. So what I mean by that is you know that every year you have to edit a major report. You know that you will be taking a look at these people's emails before they go out to these audiences. You know that you are in charge of editing these transcripts. So that's predictable. You know what tasks roughly come around. You know whose work you're editing. Those kinds of things. You have predictable colleagues and so on. Generally speaking, if you're in an in-house job, your expenses are entirely or mostly paid for. And generally speaking, most of the risk is taken on by the employer. Of course, with this comes a certain lack of freedom. You can't take off time whenever you want. You have to be there from 9 to 5. You have to be at the office maybe, unless you're working virtually, of course. But these are the kinds of things that you're looking at. It's a trade-off, right? You're getting something that's presumably more predictable, more regular income, as opposed to something where, maybe your income is less predictable and your hours are less predictable. Of course, that comes with a lack of freedom. So then if you're in a freelance situation, it's kind of the flip side of this. You have the freedom to choose your own hours. You have the freedom to choose the clients that you want to take on. Maybe, unless you're really desperate, of course. You have the freedom to charge what you want, or at least what the market will allow for. One of the things that I enjoy about freelance is the variety of tasks and the variety of clients that I'm working with. So things are not predictable. I enjoy that. I find that a challenge. And so that might be something you enjoy, working with different people on different types of tasks, or maybe not. As opposed to having your expenses paid for, you can claim business use of home expenses as well as your other expenses as business expenses. And if you're clever about that and you're good at saving your receipts, you can get a situation where you're not paying much in the way of income tax, maybe, depending upon the variables. On the downside, when you're working freelance, of course, your job lacks security. You may have an unpredictable income, and you might be taking on a certain amount of personal risk. So I do know people who freelance either as an editor or as a writer or a combination of the two, and I know some people who do quite well at it. Often people who do well in this are willing to take on a lot of work when they're maybe don't need it, just so that they can make it through the times when they do. And this can be a bit of a challenge to balance those kinds of hours. You tend to have a certain amount of freedom, as I said, to choose your hours, but then there's a lack of freedom in how many jobs you have to take on, because of course You always have it in the back of your mind that you might not get another job for a while, depending again about ongoing contracts and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a few scenarios here. Um, if you are working in freelance, this is the kind of an email that you might receive. This is actually based almost directly on an email that I did receive. Dear editor, I know this is difficult without seeing the novel, but say you were editing a YA novel that was 25 chapters. Could you do a ballpark of what that might cost? Also, I'm guessing if you were doing the 3 levels of editing, it would require 3 runs through the book. Thanks, a writer. This is an impossible request to answer directly. So I read this and I immediately know I need more information. At a minimum, I need to know the word count. A number of chapters or a number of pages is useless to me. I don't care how many pages your work is, because I don't know if you're double spacing the work, if you're single spacing the work. I don't know if you've used an 8-point or a 12-point or a 16-point font. All of these change how many words are on a typical page of manuscript. So word count is key. Before I can even start a discussion with an author, I really need to see at least a little bit of the manuscript. Now, if I'm going to offer a quote, I absolutely need to have a portion of the manuscript. But even before that, if I can't see something, then I have no idea where the writer's coming from. I don't know if they understand anything about the editing process. I don't know if they're suggesting that they need a light proofread, and I look at their manuscript and whoa, I'm not touching that as a proofread because I don't want to put my name on that. I know it needs a developmental edit, and it needs a copy edit, and it needs a proofread. So there's all these factors. I need to understand where the writer's coming from. And so usually when I write back to a client, I will ask very precise questions. What is the word count? Question mark. Please send me a 10-page excerpt from the middle of the manuscript. What are your intentions for this manuscript? Do you plan to self-publish, or are you going to try to get it published more traditionally? Those kinds of things. Oftentimes I'll ask questions like, has this piece been workshopped at all? Can you send me a synopsis, please? What sorts of marketing do you intend to do for this manuscript if you plan to self-publish? Things like that. This might seem superfluous, but if I feel like I might want to work with this writer, one of the first things that I try to do is get a better sense of this writer's headspace. And what this tells me is a lot about the individual and whether or not I'm going to want to work with them. So I would say that if I got an email like this one, minimum I need to know is word count. I need to see an excerpt from the manuscript, and I want to know the intentions of the author with this manuscript. And then I might ask these other questions as well to get a better sense of the situation. So once I've learned the word count and I've learned what this author needs, what they want, and I have a better sense of the manuscript, I can start thinking about what I might need to charge them for whatever kind of an edit it might be. Now, there are so many variables here, but let's just pretend that it's a 75,000 word manuscript and there are approximately 300 words per page. That would mean that there are 250 pages. Now, if I'm looking at this and it really is a very light edit that this manuscript needs, maybe if I'm really good, I might be able to edit 10 pages in an hour. Now, immediately you're going to probably be thinking, yeah, but when I did that copy editing exercise, it took me 5 hours to edit one page. How do I do that? Well, of course, it varies between manuscripts. And uh, it will depend on your level of editing skill as well. The more you edit, the faster you become. But let's just go through with this scenario. So let's say there's the 10 pages per hour, and so that means that if there's 250 pages, it's going to take you 25 hours for the entire edit. Just nice round big numbers, easy to calculate. So if I'm going to charge $30 per hour, which is a lower number, I would never charge less than $30 an hour, even if I liked the person and I wanted to help them out. $30 an hour times 25 hours, that's $750. That's a real low ball for a manuscript, a 75,000 word manuscript. But I'm just wanting to give you an idea of the various factors that you might take into consideration. Now, if I were doing something like this estimate, I would always add a couple of additional hours into my calculation simply because I'm going to be responding to emails. I'm going to be maybe doing a Zoom call. I might do a couple of Zoom calls. I'm going to perhaps be having to go back and forth with queries. Depending upon how much workload there is in those other areas, I'm going to have to factor that into my quote. Okay, now let's look at 25 hours times $50. Now we have $1,250. Let's say we thought that it would take 6 pages per hour, and this is certainly more realistic. Even for a fairly light edit, you're probably not going to get much more than 6 pages an hour, even if you're a fast editor. So 6 pages in an hour, so that's going to take 42 hours for the edit. And then let's say that we're going to allow 3 hours for the meetings. That's a total of 45 hours. And let's say we're charging $50 an hour, which is a reasonable amount for an edit if you're an established editor. Now suddenly we have 45 hours times $50 an hour, which is $2,250. Holy smokes! It jumped from $750 to over $2,000. You can see how these variables make a pretty big difference. So if you're not careful, you could find yourself doing a 50-hour edit and charging maybe something like $750 for it. And this happens a lot to novice editors. They are perhaps not entirely sure of their skills. They don't want to overcharge. They don't know how long the job's going to take. And then they lowball it, and then they're stuck with charging not enough for their work. There are multiple scenarios that you might want to work through when you're costing out a job, and it would be good to work through those multiple scenarios as an exercise for yourself, just to make sure that you're not undervaluing your work, because that can be quite an unpleasant place to put yourself in. You will have 1 or 2 costing questions, multiple choice costing questions, very similar to this on your final exam. You will be able to use the calculator on your phone for this question, but know that this will happen.